Hey everyone, I'm Mariana, this is Impression Blend, and today we are talking about Bring Her Back, the second feature film from the Philippou brothers, YouTubers turned filmmakers, and the duo behind Talk to Me. Now, I loved Talk to Me. It was my favorite horror film of 2023. It was scary, it was entertaining. The ending of that movie lives rent-free in my mind to this day, as well as some other visuals because they are horrific. All this to say, I decided to go into Bring Her Back pretty much blind because I was already so excited for it just based on how much I loved Talk to Me, and I wanted everything to be a surprise. I didn't watch any of the trailers, I didn't read any of the super early reactions. The only thing I read was the very vague synopsis on Letterboxd, which says, following the death of their father, a brother and sister are introduced to their new sibling by their foster mother, only to learn that she has a terrifying secret. Plus, obviously, the title gives a bit of a hint as far as what this is about. But overall, this is all very vague, so I had no idea what I was walking into, and if I thought Talk to Me was traumatizing, this movie was nightmare fuel and emotional damage. Bring Her Back is easily the scariest movie of the year, and I honestly don't think I'll see anything scarier than this in 2025. I know, it's a bold claim, especially considering that this is a bit of a slow burn and it does take its time to fully get into the horror, but once it gets there, it goes all out. It's one of those movies that made me feel like I needed a shower afterwards. It gets under your skin, it lingers, it makes you wish you could unsee some of these things, but it's also a surprisingly emotional film with a dramatic story that affected me a lot more than I expected. Yes, Bring Her Back is another entry in the grief horror subgenre, which was also a big part of Talk to Me. But just like in their previous film, the Philippou brothers found a way to put a fresh and personal spin on this idea. So even though the setup is a fairly classic horror premise, the movie still ends up feeling unique and memorable because of how they go about telling the story. Even though I will talk about the themes, I'm going to keep things pretty vague as far as the plot goes because this movie takes its time to fully reveal what's going on. It never over-explains itself, and having the audience piece things together slowly, figuring out what's actually happening is part of the experience, and I would not want to spoil that. But I do want to talk about how this horror film works, what makes it so effective, and why it hits as hard as it does. So let's start at the beginning. The movie opens with this super creepy, ominous video of some sort of ritual in Russian, immediately setting the tone and throwing you into something unsettling and weird. Now, creepy amateur video in a horror movie? Always a win in my book. I will say though, I don't believe there were subtitles on this until we saw more of it later in the movie, but because I knew what they were saying, I knew right away what this was, which I think made me realize where this movie was going a lot earlier than the filmmakers wanted me to. Still, even knowing that, nothing could prepare me for what was coming because Bring Her Back isn't just scary, it's upsetting. It's slow building, it feels heavy, its visual horror has a big psychological element to it, and because of all of this, I still can't shake it, even though it's been over a week. What really makes this movie land and what helps the horror feel so intense is how character-driven the story actually is. It's not just about how horrifying what you see on screen is, but also who these things are happening to and why. We care about the siblings because their relationship feels so genuine. We get why the foster mother is acting as weirdly as she is. We want to know what's going on with the other kid in the house. The relationships, grief, and desperation are behind the characters' motivations, and that's what propels the horror. All of this is such a stark contrast to a lot of recent horror films. Bring Her Back doesn't just take the scares seriously, which, by the way, are shocking and disturbing, but it also takes the drama and the characters seriously. And because the horror is rooted in these emotional dynamics, every scare feels personal. It's not just shocking, it's devastating. This is particularly true when it comes to the main trio at the center of the story. When we are introduced to the brother and sister, Andy and Piper, we immediately get the sense of a strong bond between the two, which only becomes clearer throughout the movie. There is trust, there is understanding, they care about each other, and they are determined to stay together, particularly with Andy willing to do whatever it takes to take care of his sister. Laura, their foster mom, is a bit of a mystery at first. There's immediately something off about her. She is nosy, she is trying too hard to seem friendly and cool. She's also clearly a lot more interested in building a relationship with Piper. She lies about small random things. And Sally Hawkins is amazing at bringing this character to life with the depth and complexity that's needed here. All of the actors are excellent. All of the characters feel like real humans, but Sally Hawkins as Laura goes above and beyond with her emotional and powerful performance. Her character isn't written to be likable, but once you understand where her desperation is coming from, you see her in a more nuanced human light. You see that her resolve comes from that desperation and not from confidence of knowing what she's doing. There's also this cool visual element to her that was apparently intentional. I was watching some interviews with the Philippou brothers, and they said they intentionally wanted her dressed in autumnal colors to make her look like a dying leaf. And if you pay attention when you see her in some earlier footage, she's actually wearing a slightly different color palette. There generally are a lot of interesting visual choices made here. Recurring visual cues, ways to build the atmosphere, to create the feeling that something is very wrong, details to pay attention to. For example, there are a lot of circles throughout the movie. Some of them are quite literal magic circles, defining the area that contains a ritual and magical energy within it. They also represent the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. And more broadly, circles symbolize wholeness and balance, which is something all of the characters in this movie are missing and are desperately looking for. All of these things play into the story, and I love that type of stuff. All of the little clues the filmmakers leave to tie it all together. Something else that's really important here is sound design. Now, you might say, really? Sound design in a horror movie? No way.
Groundbreaking.
But hear me out. First of all, we have the sister, Piper, who is vision impaired, and that's more than just a character trait here. So having the world of this movie not only feel tactile and detailed, but also have a very deliberate sound design is important to show how she experiences the world. But also the horror itself is so much more intense with layered sound design. I'm going to be honest, these visuals with the amazing practical effects and with the camera lingering on some gnarly stuff made me look away a couple of times. I'm sorry, they got me, and I've seen some shit. I watch a lot of horror. But looking away didn't do all that much for me because the sound design gave my brain everything it needed to continue painting the horrifying picture in my mind. I had nightmares after this movie, so thanks for that. What also sticks with you and what contributes to the horror feeling so emotionally charged is how all of this ties back into grief, the main theme of the film. Grief really is the villain of the story, how far it can lead someone, what refusing to deal with and accept loss can do to a person. This is also where Ollie comes in, the strange-looking boy with a shaved head who is living with Laura when Andy and Piper arrive. There's that great shot of him in the trailer with only one dilated pupil that looks so creepy. Now, I don't want to get too far into this because once again, it takes a while to get the answers as far as his character goes, but his presence is very important. He's not just some random, strange element of this movie that's ambiguous and up for your interpretation. Ollie remains a mystery for a while, particularly because he doesn't talk. You see him just kind of wandering around outside, watching people, acting strangely, but I promise you do eventually get answers. Also, the kid actor playing him is insanely good. I can't imagine how the filmmakers got that performance out of him, but it was terrifying and heartbreaking at the same time. Here's what Danny Philippou said about him. Oliver, as a character, is a manifestation of grief and the way it can eat you alive. That's the monster in this story, the consuming, never-ending pain of unresolved grief. And that's the real horror of Bring Her Back. It's about what happens when you can't let go. These ideas hang heavily over the entire movie, and as we watch characters deal with grief and loss differently, we also see the way this can corrupt everything they touch. Now, I do have to say that this movie will not be for everyone, and it could end up being pretty divisive. First of all, this is bleak. This is not for horror fans who are looking for a fun time. I mean it. I can easily see people saying this was too much for them. My initial reaction was that this movie was a bit too bleak, and that is actually why I was struggling a bit with rating it. I was deeply uncomfortable while watching it, and in the end, I also just ended up feeling very sad. There's imagery I kind of want to unsee. The movie does feel heavy, and it's the type of horror I would describe as too effective, if you know what I mean. The other thing people might not respond well to is the fact that it is a slow burn that doesn't over-explain itself. Now, I actually like that about the film. I'm a big fan of movies where you have to put things together, and in the end, Bring Her Back is not that ambiguous. The answers are there. You know exactly what's going on. But there are things you might be left wanting to know more about. For example, I really wanted to know more about the ritual. I needed the lore. I love lore. And I read that the Philippous actually did think all of that through, and they have all of the lore and the backstories, so I wish they would share more. But realistically, you don't actually need to know the details for the story and the themes to work. Here's the bottom line though. The Philippou brothers delivered another memorable, horrifying gem. For a while, Bring Her Back plays out like a moody drama, but the atmosphere keeps getting more and more ominous, and once it gets to those more shocking horror elements, there's no turning back. Those visuals get very uncomfortable, and just like with Talk to Me, the camera stays on these things for longer than you expect. The effects are fantastic, and there is no way I could show any of them here. The makeup work is insane. Things get intense, they get brutal, and they look way too real. This movie is tragic and very disturbing, but what really elevates it is the emotional, dramatic story behind that truly horrific imagery. It's a character-driven nightmare that's rooted in something deeply human, and to be honest, this one really rattled me. The horror and gore lands because you care, and every moment of dread carries real emotional weight. It's a film about loss, loneliness, grief, and desperation. It's about the terrifying things people do to fill the void that just won't go away. So yes, it's unsettling, it's upsetting, it's very dark. It's a slow burn that doesn't spoon feed you answers, and it definitely won't be for everyone. But if you like horror that sticks with you, Bring Her Back isn't just the scariest horror film of the year, it's also the most heartbreaking.